Hey friends, I'm still E. Prabilski. This is still Authority. I still talk about spilling the tea on the publishing industry. However, I wanted to address something different. Those of you who follow me on TikTok, you will recognize the robe. Those of you who don't follow me on TikTok, well, this is your introduction to the infamous fuzzy. It's teal in real world, but looks blue on screen. My robe. Today is a day of protests, and I wanted to share a video because I wanted to express something. I'm not able to attend protests in person because of my Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. If a crowd gets rowdy, if somebody knocks me wrong, if I get arrested, there's so many things that could happen to me that would cause me catastrophic physical damage. It would be very easy for me to be severely and irrevocably injured. I dislocated my patella making the bed at one point. While I do some physical things, I go to the gym, I fence, there's a lot of stuff I do, I also know what isn't safe for me. And while most of these protests, I'm sure, are going to be completely safe with absolutely no problems, I also understand that the risks outweigh the rewards for me, physically. That isn't to say that I'm not resisting. This video is my contribution to the protest, this podcast episode, because I know that I already uploaded one this week about RFK Jr. and talked about his stance on autism and how much that affects me as an autistic person. And I know this podcast is usually about writing, but I'm also a whole person and I need to use what of my platform I can to speak out in ways that are important to me. The things the current administration is doing are wrong. Deporting people without due process is terrifying. And I know there are people out there who are saying, well, he's not an American citizen. He doesn't get due process. That's not what the Constitution says. It says any person. And these are definitely people. And you're saying, well, they're not American citizens. How do we know without due process? And some of you are saying, well, there was due process. Well, the gentleman who's currently at the heart of a lot of this, Albrego Garcia, he's not an American citizen, but he had an order of protection preventing him from being removed to the very country they sent him to explicitly. And they said it's an error. Now they're claiming they can't get him back. It doesn't matter if he's a gang member. I wouldn't care if he was a serial killer. He deserves due process, and he deserves to be treated the way the Constitution demands that we treat people. That's not because I necessarily believe they're innocent. I don't know anything about this man. He could be incredibly guilty. He could be an MS-13 member for all I know. There's no evidence presented of that in anywhere at all whatsoever that is valid, and they certainly haven't brought it to a court of law, but I'm not going to say it doesn't exist. But I wouldn't care if this was Ed Gaines. Due process is due process, and it's a right afforded to every person. Because at a certain point, if due process doesn't happen, we end up in a position where they can just say anything and do whatever they want. And there's absolutely nothing you can do to stop it. You say, well, that can't happen to me, and I'm an American citizen. Nobody's going to know if you are or not. They're just going to hear this person was illegal and get disappeared. And you will not have any protections. They aren't going to know you're an American citizen, or if they do know that you're an American citizen, they aren't going to care, because nobody can make them care, because the rule of law will mean nothing. That is the direct path to Auschwitz. That is the direct path to Birkenau. That is the direct path to what happened over in Nanking. That is the direct path to all of these atrocities in human history, is the dehumanization and othering of people, and then stripping protections and processes away from them. And because they're the quote-unquote enemy, people tend to be like, well, they're the enemy, it's fine. These aren't the good people, these aren't the right people. These are people who deserve this. And you're gonna hear that a lot. And then it's gonna be you. And you're gonna be like, wait, no, I don't deserve this. This wasn't me. But it was. That is the path that all of this leads down. Most of you know me as an author. Most of you know me as an editor. I am also a historian. I have a degree in history. I focused on European history and I focused on the Renaissance, but I am certainly aware of World War II and many other atrocities. I've studied them pretty extensively. I am aware of a lot of this stuff, and let me tell you, as an autistic historian, The constellation is there. They're connecting the dots to create it again. I don't believe that our country is necessarily going to end there. I believe that there are safeguards enough in place to prevent it. I believe our democracy will hold. I have to believe those things, because if I don't believe those things, I can't get up in the morning and go to work. I can't write, I can't function, I can't exist. However, I also personally know trans people who are leaving the country because they're afraid, and they're protecting themselves and their children. And you're going to say, well, I don't like those people, so good riddance. Okay, but that just makes you a Nazi. It just does. And you're going to say, well, no, I don't hate the Jews. It doesn't matter. The Jews didn't do anything to deserve it, and the Nazis didn't just go after the Jews. They went after the Romani. They went after the gay people. They went after disabled people. They went after everybody who wasn't Aryan. It wasn't just the Jews. They were definitely the bulk of it. Don't get me wrong. I am not in the slightest bit minimizing the horrific impacts of the Holocaust on the Jewish community. I'm not a Holocaust denier, but I want to acknowledge that it started with things like burning the institute that was studying gender and taking their books. It started with things like that. It didn't start at Birkenau and Auschwitz. It started at things like that. It started at them dehumanizing people. It started with them saying, well, these people aren't, they're not really citizens. They're not people who deserve protections. They're not good people. They're not the people we want in our society. They're not the people who deserve to be in our society. They started othering all of these people. And they started trying to claim that these people didn't deserve their place in the world. And because it was minorities that most of these people weren't part of, it was easy enough. Well, they're disabled. They don't they don't contribute anything to society. They don't work. They don't give anything back. They just sponge off the government and or their families. They're not really worth anything. They're just human waste, which is basically what RFK Jr. has said about autistic people. We'll never pay taxes. We'll never write poetry. We'll never go on dates. We'll never use the bathroom unassisted. And while I've heard some people defend it and say, oh, he just meant the most profoundly disabled people. Sure, I guess, but they're still people, aren't they? Aren't those people still people? We still have rich inner lives. We still have emotions. We still have experiences. We still have joys and fears and concerns and things we like and things we hate, just like everybody else. He just wants to prevent people like that. The only way to prevent people from being that way is eugenics. Autism is a genetic thing. It's not a disease that you catch. It is just a way the brain is sometimes wired. And it is highly heritable. We have so much research proving its genetics. We even have done genome mapping, and I'm pretty sure we know which genes it is. And if we haven't identified the exact ones, we've certainly identified very close and are working toward that. It's genetic. So how do you prevent more autistic people? Well, we stop the autistic people from breeding. There won't be any more autistic people if they stop breeding. That's eugenics. We will stop the, the Ubermensch will prevent it. No. Fuck off. Autistic people are still people. Even those who can't communicate or are profoundly disabled. And every human being is of worth. I even believe the people that I strongly disagree with are technically valuable to society. I certainly don't want them killed. I don't want them destroyed. I don't want them harmed, really. I'd like them removed from power and ignored for the rest of their lives and lose all their money, but I don't want them damaged. Like, physically. There's a line, at which point do we say these people aren't people anymore? And then what does it mean to not be a person? What does that entail? What do we do with people who aren't people? It goes bad fast. And they're trying to say we're not people. And they're starting with the immigrants and the disabled, just like the Nazis did, just like the communists did in China, just like they're doing to the Uyghurs, just like they're doing to people in Palestine. They're turning others into the enemy, and they're turning the people against the others. We did it here in World War II with the internment camps and the Japanese. And we've done it to Native Americans. We've done it to black people. We've done it countless times. Americans have done this. No, we didn't perpetrate the Holocaust. No, it was never on that scale. No, it never quite got that bad, technically. But until the 1990s, mental institutions and asylums still existed. There are photos of kids being put in straitjackets and just changed to radiators and left. And those kids, a lot of them are adults now who remember. Those places existed less than 30 years ago. They were still around. A lot of them closed in the 90s. There are people alive who were forcibly sterilized because they were mentally ill, or because they were Native, or because they're black. There are people alive who have dealt with this. There are still people alive from the Holocaust. These things aren't some mists of time nobody remembers. It happened so long ago. No, they're recent. We still have people who remember. There are still Holocaust survivors out there with the tattoos who talk about it. These people are alive. They may be elderly, but they're alive. And the people who lived through a lot of the stuff that happened in the mental institutions, they only started shutting them down in the 70s. There are people who are still alive, who remember being in those places. There are people who worked in those places who are still around telling those stories. It's not like it's a forever ago kind of thing. We are still here. I did not go to any of those places. I have never been treated that way, thank Father in heaven. But I know people who have. And it's horrifying. It's not something that most people think about, because we think of ourselves as evolved and past all of that, and that's all just brutal backstory. It happened so long ago. It didn't. I'm only almost 40. I'm 39. I'll be 40 in August. And I know people my age who were in places like that. I know a lot about that kind of thing. Studying mental institutions and what happened in them is one of the special interests I have. I've done a lot of research on that crap. It's not something that just was a forever ago thing. It starts with them deporting without due process immigrants or illegal immigrants by their claim, and criminals. The people that most of society will say, they probably shouldn't be here and we don't really like those ones. You know, if it'll start by them just saying, oh, well, they're just gang members. Nobody wants those around. They're bad. They're dangerous. They're hurting people, right? Of course, we don't want those around. We're a polite society. We don't want people around who are selling drugs. No. Those are bad people. We're just getting rid of the bad ones. But if they don't have due process, how do you know? How do you know they're the bad ones? Just because the administration tells you they're the bad ones? Is that how you know? Because somebody told you? Is that just your assumption that they're being honest? I know they've told you that they're honest and everybody else is lying. I'm very well aware that that is what they have told you, and that is what they are selling. But if you can't verify, how do you know? And you're going to say, well, I can't verify what the Democrats say either. And well, that's true. Sometimes you can't. But you shouldn't trust anybody when you can't see their work, or at the very least their track record, or their history. You shouldn't just blindly trust anyone. Honestly, you shouldn't blindly trust me. Frankly, go verify everything I've just said. And if I'm wrong, tell me in the comments. I'll correct it. If you provide actual evidence that I'm wrong. I'm not, by the way. I do happen to know that I'm not. But if you provide me actual evidence, I'm open to changing my mind. That's kind of the thing, though. The propaganda is that these are unwanted bad people, and that we shouldn't want those bad people in our world, right? Of course we shouldn't want those bad people in our world. But the definition of who's unwanted is going to expand. And it'll expand. and it'll expand, and eventually it'll include you. Quite probably. And when it does include you, those of us who've been screaming from the rooftops that it'll eventually include you, we'd say we told you so, but we're probably going to be dead by then.